Thanks for coming today. Just to let you know, we are broadcasting live, so please be aware of that, and that will be broadcast on YouTube. So members of the public and the press may be watching and can use the footage as they see fit. Just to let you know, we've had some apologies from Marcus Bernasconi, but haven't received apologies from any others. And I'd just like to welcome Councillor Deborah Harris, who is in place, Councillor Jan. Councillor Deborah Harris will also be sitting on the tax and finish inquiry as the Liberal Democrat representative on that inquiry. Before we carry on, has anyone got any declarations of interest that they'd like to raise? Cool. And just very briefly, it's to agenda item 4 is just to agree and note the action notes and the action tracker. And you will note that on the document you've got the action tracker, the last 2 items have actually been completed, but that will be updated accordingly. Has anyone got any comments on the action notes of the action tracker? Just like to welcome Councillor Francis as the Cabinet Member for Digital Culture, Heritage and Tourism, which is a long title. We've got Dawn Beaumont, is that correct? Yes. Who's Head of Library Services, and Simon Easton, who's Head of Cultural Development and Tourism, and Chris Jordan, who's the Assistant Director of Neighbourhoods. So we're going to, I will pass on to Councillor Francis, who will give us a bit of a summary of what she's been up to and her brief and how it relates to the committee's remit. She has obviously come to us before, and I'm sure other officers can chip in as appropriate and necessary.
Thank you very much, Chair. Right, we got everything on? Okay, thank you very much for having me today. Pleasure to be here and talk about my portfolio priorities. Now, as portfolio responsibilities changed in May, I've listed the responsibilities that relate to this particular policy, and those areas include culture, heritage and tourism, library and the Commonwealth Games legacy. Okay, over the summer you'll probably be aware that we have recreated conversations with communities and stakeholders across the city. They were generally very well attended, and I was present at several, along with yesterday, and really impressed with the level of passion and commitment. As a result of that, we have developed a statement of intent, which has been approved by the leader and cabinet members in September. With continued support from public health, from a public health officer secondment, an external community consultants practice, Truman Change, was commissioned in September to undertake consultation with what we refer to as Southern Voices, those particular hard to reach groups across the city. That will be taking place during the month of October, and we expect results to be available from November this year. We have a focus on recruitment of additional fixed-term staff to help lead with coordination and development of the new cultural strategy that's been developed, and that will take place over the next few weeks. And as recruitment for this took place over the summer, and it wasn't a success, there were shortages, and I referred to this when I was at previous scrutiny. It's also proposed to have an independent review of cultural activity across the city. So we will continue as a city to work with our academic, cultural and arts partners, and we'll do that to make sure that we can drive investment across the sector. Drive investment into the city, providing a boost not just for our arts and cultural sector, but the very important and growing hospitality and tourism sector as well. This will help ensure viability and sustainability across the arts and culture sector, which in turn will enable everyone to afford and enjoy arts and culture in Birmingham. Recruitment for chair of Birmingham Cultural Compact is ongoing. The Cultural Compact, for those who are not aware, is a consortium of local stakeholders representing the area of culture, higher education, business and health. And the aim there again is to drive investment into cities for starters. So a draft strategy was produced, which was then separated into two documents, including a new heritage SPD. SPD being an acronym for strategic planning document. A new conservation, a new conservation and heritage panel was appointed in June of this year, and the new heritage SPD will be presented to Cabinet in January 2023 and then go out for public consultation. Slide, please. We are currently commissioning to appoint a recognised public arts practice to review all the statues and monuments in the city. There are many of them, and not all of them are physically or very public. But this will include an equality review. And again, a draft strategy will go to Cabinet in spring of next year. Slide 6, please. So as a city, and both myself and officers continue to work with higher education sector in Birmingham, very important partners there. In particular, we're working very closely alongside the University of Birmingham in their development of the Culture Forward agenda. We continue to engage with the Heritage Strategy Group at their quarterly meetings. I have to confess I don't get to all the meetings, but the officers do, and I get updated during cabinet members' briefing. We continue to work with Culture Central, which is a consortium, a body which is representative of arts and cultural organisations operating in the region. Very successful organisation. We have a very good relationship with them. And we continue to support local organisations, for example, Legacy West Midlands and Black History Partnership, Black Story Partnership on a range of different festivals and initiatives and celebratory events. Slide 7, please. Okay, in June this year, Cabinet really pleased to approve the Visitor Destination Plan. It's a very important piece of work which recognised perhaps for the first time the importance of tourism to our economy, and certainly providing the success of the Games of Summer, a lot to shout about, and we know how important as a sector that is to our city in terms of wealth, jobs creation, and continuing to put them on the map. Very important piece of work. And we have a fantastic tourism officer, Ben Howe, who I hope we will meet at some point if we've not already done so. I'm really pleased that we were able to make that appointment some time ago. There will be a major events feasibility study that's due to be delivered very shortly, commissioned in September. 3 other feasibility studies have been commissioned or underway, focusing on accessible tourism, sustainable tourism, and the citizen's attraction impacts. So, can I publicly thank Ben, the tourism officer, and the arts and culture team who worked extremely hard, particularly in recent months, pulling this together. So thank you very much. Slide 8, please. Okay, a hugely successful Birmingham International Dance Festival was commissioned and delivered in June this year. And I'm sure many of you saw the different dances going on all over the city. Brilliant, well attended. It featured bands from around the globe and across the Commonwealth, and included 9 world premieres, 11 UK premieres, 129 shows with over 300 artists, which is quite amazing. In excess of 25,000 for the live festival shows in the city squares and in Hansfield Park. And something in the region of 1,500 screen dance online attendances across the world. It's just an amazing thing to happen in the summer. And we're currently developing proposals for an annual Birmingham Festival from 2023 as one of the legacies from Commonwealth Games. Slide 9, please. Okay, we are awaiting an update from Create Central, which is an external body, before we can renew the Birmingham office. But recommendations, again, will go to Cabinet in the spring of next year. Okay. Slide 10. As a council, we continue to support arts and cultural organisations across Birmingham. Hopefully that's evident from what we said so far. However, there are challenges for our funded cultural organisations, including inflated cost of utilities combined with cost of living crisis. And this has led to reduced spending and thus income reduction. We know many of our arts and cultural organisations, our theatres, our music venues, have struggled to get audiences back. Some of that is as a result of what happened with COVID, with people going out. Basically, people have got less money in their pockets. It's not been helped, in particular, by some delays from central government who fund Arts Council. Arts Council, ACE, Arts Council in England, are responsible for funding of NPOs for the big organisations. This announcement was supposed to be made a couple of weeks ago. Organisations were on tenterhooks trying to find out what their funding would be from next year onwards, and it was delayed sadly. The announcement is, we understand, it's only Wednesday, isn't it? We understand the announcement is going to be made on Friday. So we will all wait with bated breath to see what our key organisation get. Slide 11. Okay, we continue to commission annual cultural projects. For example, Birmingham Heritage Week, that was held in September this year, amazingly successful event with nearly 200 events taking place across the city, not just in the city centre, but in different wards. And in particular this year, there's a lot of activity in the north of the city and around Sutton Coldfield. 32 new organisations joining in for the first time, and over 100,000 views online, which is simply an amazing figure. Really, really pleased with that, and I would hope very much to recommission next year because they do fantastically well with a relatively small amount of money that they get. The second one to highlight was Black History Month, which was launched in September, and that includes the promotion of a whole range of activities across the city, which takes place during October every year. And we will consider how to commission that next year. Again, there's been one organisation that's been doing it. We want to make sure that we're getting the best possible deal for the city and for our citizens. Finally, I wanted to raise the World Reimagined. This is a project which has focused on national education in cities, highlighting the true history of trafficked slaves across the Atlantic. And that includes the Birmingham Globes Art Trail, delivered August, October this year. The last event was last Friday, I believe, at the Bullring Shopping Centre. And that culminated in a display of all the 10 globes. I don't know if colleagues have had the opportunity to see them. They're huge. They're absolutely fascinating to look at. And they are genuine works of art, very interesting. Slide 12, please. Okay, Arts Council England awarded Birmingham City Council 4.99 million in March of this year for major repairs to Birmingham Museum Art Gallery for the period 23-24. We will possibly pick up some of the detailed work that needs to be done for BMAG, but most of you, I think, will be aware that it has to close, sadly, in November for some major work investment. A full business case will go to Cabinet in December this year. Physical works to commence from January 2023 until July 2024, but that is subject to approval from Arts Council for the scheme. Next slide, please. Feasibility appraisal for storage improvements at the Museum Collection Centre in BMAG has been commissioned in October, and we anticipate a report being available in 2023. Okay, we're now going to move on to look at libraries. Head of Library Services is with me, and I'm sure will share, but they've had an amazingly busy time. Visits to the library in Birmingham increased by 4,000 visits a day during the Commonwealth Games. So it feels like a long time ago now, but if you reflect back and think about all those ramps and TV square during the games with the ball, it was very, very beneficial for football during the library, and of course for the rec theatre next door as well. So that's amazing. That's something we certainly want to build on. 2022, a daily average of visits was 7,800 in comparison to 3,500 in 2018-19. That is some building. So total, it's been rounded up. It's very, very bright figure, but total of over 100,000 people visited during the Commonwealth Games. Slide 15, please. So as well as the Library of Birmingham, we have in the city next to over 30 other community libraries. Libraries are currently working as part of the council-wide response to the cost of living crisis, and we're working very closely with our partners in public health, in housing directorate, and with the early intervention and prevention programme team. And some of that is to explore our very valuable library buildings and library estate might be used slightly differently. So, for example, I recently visited Erdington Library to look at what's going on there and to talk to some of the users and how they were using, and also to pick up some very important maintenance issues. But we're very interested as the council in the current climate to look at how people use their libraries. Look at, we know in different areas that there are different things that are popular in some, more popular in some areas and less popular in others. So it depends on location and hours of opening, access to computers, all sorts of things. And it's very important that we keep that review live and make sure that our citizens, our service users, are able to access the best possible service to meet their needs as citizens. We want to make sure that our community libraries can offer, as far as possible, a warm welcome for all members of the community, enabling them to be safe and warm. You will be aware that there are a range of initiatives at the moment looking at how we might use community spaces in our libraries to make sure that people, during the cost of living crisis, people who can't afford to access homes or even charge their phones or laptops, have got somewhere to go, and they'll be able to have a hot drink. To do whatever they need to do. It might involve, looking for employment and volunteering opportunities. But it's important, I think, as a city that we offer those spaces to citizens. And we'll be undertaken to see if we can encourage our local business communities to take part in that and perhaps provide some of the drinks that might be available. And our overall aim is to partner with local charities to dispense blankets and other donated items, so we can make sure that those most in need in the city can access the support they need. Thank you. So I've just referenced community libraries, and maintenance is currently taking place in several community library buildings that have been identified as a priority. Condition surveys have been undertaken in all sites, and a programme of maintenance work will be aligned with the transformation of the library service. And that links into some things I just mentioned. Risk assessments have been updated to reflect the current condition of the buildings and to consider future service developments. So our library estate is a real mixed bag of buildings. Some are a bit verging on the porter cabins, others are listed buildings, so there's a whole range of responsibility. We have to make sure that they're reasonable good quality for access from our citizens and for the staff who work in them. That's hugely important. You will hear more about those initiatives as the months go on, I'm sure. Slide 17, please. So all libraries continue to provide quality information and digital support. We know this is an absolute lifesaver for people who don't have access to digital services at home by dint of age or affordability, or for people who live in temporary accommodation. It's a really important part of our. By enabling individuals, communities to develop learning skills, the role of the library service is hugely important. If we can attract people to come into our buildings, if they find out about health and well-being, physical activity, how to upskill, where to be signposted voluntary opportunities, that's a really important part of who we are. And libraries offer help to children and adults to engage with and feel safe. Again, dependent on the library, its location, and hours of opening. There are a whole range of activities. So, you will all be in wards where there are different things going on. I know in my ward, in Melbourne, for example, every day there are things going on with sort of drop-ins for children, adults, all sorts of things. And there are vital sources of support to many. Libraries work very closely alongside adult education to support delivery of our digital inclusion strategy, and learning around the development of digital skills is available at libraries for those who want it. And I think you'll all be aware that increasingly that's the norm. There's an expectation that people have those skills in order to take part in all sorts of areas of life. And finally, libraries provide access to personal computers, Wi-Fi, and areas to study. And again, I know from going around the city, certainly from being in the Library of Birmingham and other community libraries, you can see students doing their homework, school students just using the time and facilities to access books and papers, older people sometimes just coming to charge their laptops, physically, so it's available. So I think that's really important that we keep that available for our citizens. Okay, I'm nearly there. Slide 18. The Library of Birmingham continues to host and support the Youth Hub in partnership with the Department of Work and Pension. That was a project that came out of a pilot. It was quite successful, and they certainly DWP were very happy with what they saw. And essentially, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the project was created to reach out and make contact with the very, very hard to reach groups, particularly young people within those groups who weren't accessing traditional sources of advice and support for career development. So it continues to host and support job fairs in partnership with the DWP and the Combined Authority. That's been a fantastic example of a really good national, regional, and local partnership arrangement. And this very much supports a wider jobs and skills agenda, operating as a multi-agency hub and working with some careers and key service components in order to deliver that. Career service, youth service, local employers, as well as offering advice for business startups and enterprise. Okay, slide 19. Can I answer that? A new library pilot is currently being developed, and this is what I've alluded to already, to explore the current use of libraries and access to the library estate and related services. So what we're keen here is to support a best possible rounded service for people who are not quite sure what they want or what they need. Sorry, apologies if that sounds funny, but often we spend a lot of money as a city, like many other councils do, by not giving people the support they need at the earliest possible opportunity. So if people have crises, if they've got financial problems, health problems, employment problems, the longer it escalates, the worse it gets, the more it costs the city. So we've done the maths, and we know that early intervention, if financial resources are ploughed in at the earliest possible opportunity, that saves us money down the line, and it increases the likelihood of somebody having a positive, either individuals or families having a positive outcome. So that's got to make sense for all of us. So We will seek to work with our health and housing partners to make sure that the advice and information that we give to those families and individuals most in need is there. And there will be a pilot, and that pilot properly evaluated to determine its transferability to other areas in the city. Fantastic. Commonwealth Games Legacy. Now, I know you had a full presentation and update at the last meeting, so I don't propose to go through this again, but if there are specific questions, I'll try my best to answer. If I can't from here and now, I'll make sure you get a written response as soon as possible. So, okay? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, fantastic.
You're
Do
very
any others wish to add anything in before we answer questions? Has anyone got any questions for us would like to ask?
Hi, I just wanted to know that Film Birmingham office, could you give us a bit more detail about what they actually do and the service they provide
For the
Birmingham Film Office?
The library.
Yeah.
No, Birmingham
The
Film Office.
Birmingham Film Office.
Oh, the film festival. Oh, that's
Film Office.
Sorry.
It's fine. Yes, they're basically a production location services. So it was established back in 2006, before my time, and it was set up to help coordinate filming in the city for film companies, TV companies, and anybody wanting to film either TV productions, film productions, literally to coordinate internally with property services or highways about road closures or parks about using of parks. It's a very small office. It's one person and an assistant, and it's always been under-resourced in terms of the demand that's been increasing over the years. So, for example, Steven Spielberg's Ready Player One filmed here. Tom Cruise was here last year with Mission Impossible 118 or whatever number it was. And so local filming as well, everything from Doctors for the BBC and small-scale independent films. Create Central, which is the now regional body, is a film and production agency set up to try and encourage more filming in this region and in Birmingham. And we're liaising with them quite closely, encouraging. It's for the screen industries in total, as opposed to just film and TV. So that includes digital gaming, media as well, because there's quite a lot of activity in those creative companies in Birmingham as well. But the Film Birmingham office is our own office that is coordinating filming in the city.
Okay, because I'm just wondering that there are a lot of people who are interested in filming and social media. And I was just wondering, could we, from the film office, if they know where certain filming is taking place, could they get volunteers or people interested in certain things and coordinate that so that we can give people some opportunity to volunteer and get their foot in the door? Because I know it's quite a difficult industry, and it's quite a high barrier to entry.
It's a question of resource in terms of the officers. They're extremely busy in trying to literally coordinate those film activities and getting permissions, everything, as I say, from street closures, road closures, but also going out on filming locations to make sure that the film company is doing what it said it would and not doing something else, which is, often happens. And so the capacity of the team to take on. But having said that, they do have taken on the odd student or young person to come on to the team and help get a bit of work experience. We don't have the capacity to sort of encourage. That's more now with that Create Central agency that is looking at jobs and skills for young people, entrance to the market, progression into the industry. And I must say, with the BBC now and its expansion in the city, there's a huge amount of investment coming into apprenticeships for filming, which is a good thing.
And it may well be, Councillor B, that some of these opportunities might come to fruition with partners, with academic partners. You've got those sort of academic courses, and sometimes they facilitate training.
Kate wanted to come in on this as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in because in my portfolio as well is the youth service and the career service and 14 to 19 employment access. So just so you know, in the library of Birmingham, I think during half term we had a jobs fair which was specifically on creative and media. That was advertising all the youth centres across Birmingham with a QR code. So yeah, people could actually register their interest in that. So we're pulling those things together, using our libraries as council as outlined as an opportunity for job fairs and promoting some of those opportunities for them.
If I may add, Chair, as well, there are a number of organisations in the city, I say a number, but a few key ones. Creative Alliance springs to mind, that is specialising in bringing younger people, particularly through to creative industries, not just film and TV production, but other creative industries as well. So there are some dedicated organisations in the city that are trying to, but there's never enough. That's the problem.
Just interested, I don't know if you compare an interest at this point, but I used to be employed by Creative Alliance.
Oh.
I'm no longer employed, but I don't think I need to compare that. So there you go. Have you got any more questions?
Yes, I want to know what sort of investment we're making in digital services, because I know that there are a lot of people, for example, in enterprise and innovation, where they'll go and set up an independent cake and make cakes or do other creative card making, decorative things through social media. And also, we speak 86 different languages in our city. So, what is there some sort of innovation that we can do where we allow people to hear things in their own language, where they can just click a button and they'll get lots of vast amounts of information, where to go, and signpost them. Because I think there's a lot of confusion when there's language barriers for people. That's what I found with people in my ward, certainly. And a quarter of Birmingham is BAME, so there are obviously 6 different languages, which is quite a lot. So what are we doing to implement more digital services and to automate things and to allow people with different language barriers and experiences to actually access things and access information?
Well, I can contribute to some. Yeah, the digital inclusion strategy sits within my service area until January, when it moves back to Peter Bishop's area. So I've sat in those strategic groups where we're putting together the private sector alongside ourselves to be able to promote digital inclusion. So Dawn's going to come in as well. In terms of translation, there are 2 different schools of thought around this. I have worked in the council, my previous council, where all they did was say Google Translate and just make sure that every web page actually had it there, because that would automatically change the language to another language. And then there's another group of people who are actually saying, no, don't do that, do translate everything. So I think we've got to have that discussion internally about the best way to support our communities.
I think there was a discussion, I can't remember where this discussion took place actually, but there was a discussion very recently that it was understood that the council has the language capacities across the council and in its employment not to have to hire specific translators for specific services.
And I'm sure that's the case. Whether that's appropriate or not, because some of the information you want to give is quite specialised. Mm-hmm. So although you may do
obviously it depends on the directorate, I suppose. Yeah, but that was raised recently.
Just to say that the Brasshouse Language School is part of our education based in the Library of Birmingham, and I know they are doing a lot around that they're also hosting digital inclusion, aren't they? So I think they would be a good contact. So I will take that back. We work closely with them. We've also got in the Library of Birmingham, we're part of the BIPC, which is the Intellectual Property Advice. So for people that are starting up and getting their businesses going, and a lot of that, a lot of the entrepreneurs now, they're starting online, just as you say, those businesses there. So we are hosting a lot of those online workshops that we started in COVID so that people could continue to get their businesses started. So there is work underway, and that is the direction of travel, yes, around businesses, and the languages is a good point. We'll take that back.
I think, Councillor, as a city, we recognise the importance of digital properly. We see it for the first time. So part of the rationale for my change in portfolio was for my role to reflect what happens nationally with digital culture and media in central government. So there is a digital strategy in place. There is something going to cabinet next week. We have work, I think, on the digital front to do internally and externally. First of all, we have to make sure that our systems are going to go within council, but certainly that we have to promote being a digitally connected city. So that, again, so our citizens and businesses can take best possible opportunity to improve their learning and to make sure that they're not excluded from anything by dint of their digital exclusion. Does that make sense?
That's the day. I'll come back to you if you've got any more questions, but I just wanted to, and Elizabeth, that's a question. Harry, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks for the welcome, Chair. So, the report, cabinet member. I was quite interested. I just want to take you back to slide 5. I was quite interested, which is about the heritage strategy and conservation panel. I just wanted to ask. I mean, I'm fortunate to have conservation area in Old Yard, which is the oldest conservation area in the city. And I just wanted to know whether there was, and I know there's a appraisal and management process going on in terms of conservation areas in the city. I just wanted to know if this was connected with the work that you were doing. So you talked about statues and doing it, sort of, but we've got a lot of heritage in terms of conservation areas, which include green spaces and buildings. Is that joined up? Is my question, or could it be?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but I'm not qualified to be the person to give you the correct answer, which would be Chris Patrick, who's our conservation officer. So we work with colleagues in planning and conservation, Chris and Andrew particularly, on the heritage strategy. And it was split into 2 parts. One, as Councillor Price referred to, was the heritage document itself, which we consulted with our heritage strategy group stakeholders, and will go out for public consultation in due course. The second part is the heritage strategic planning document. This is the first time we've managed to get something like an SPD as a sort of formal policy statement about measures on heritage. So that's a real plus, and I think it's a good step forward. The new Conservation and Heritage panel is an independent panel chaired by, I think, Joe Hollyoak from the city, and looks at a whole raft of issues, including matters to do with conservation. Now that's managed by Chris Patrick, so it's connected to the Heritage Group, and Joe and people on that panel come to the Heritage Strategy Group, which is chaired by Councillor Davis, who's our Heritage champion. So there is a connection across there. Chris and Andrew come to the Heritage Strategy Group meetings. So there's much better dialogue between ourselves and planning, for example, and around this, the new heritage strategy coming out next year than perhaps there was previously. But in terms of the technical detail, Councillor, I'm not sure in terms of Chris's response to the conservation areas.
Perhaps we could put Councillor Harris in touch with Chris Patrick, if that's okay, so she can have a more in-depth conversation, particularly if she's got
I just knew that that bit of work was going on in one section because I've been involved in it, and I see this bit of work. It's just that how would it join up?
Councillor Sandu.
Yeah, mine was actually branched off that one, which is basically with the conservation and heritage panel. Will they obviously, when the draft strategy paper goes to cabinet regarding the public arts, the monuments and statues, will it be them overseeing that as well?
They'll be definitely connected with that, yes, indeed. And there's quite a close correlation between obviously public art, the public realm, and the heritage strategy.
Yeah.
So they're sister documents, if I could say that.
Yeah, it's split in 2.
Yeah. So the heritage strategy group, we're very much involved in we already do have a public art strategy, by the way. It's just out of date and we need to refresh it. And we're planning to commission an external practice to do that. It's briefly mentioned. But in that process, the Heritage Strategy Group and the Conservation Panel arrangements will be consulted.
Does anyone else got any more questions?
Sorry, just follow up. Regarding national law changing, in regards to statutes and monuments, is that's something that might possibly change by the time we get to spring 2023? That's something I think the panel may have to take into account.
Yeah, no, indeed. And the review of statutes and monuments, which we've talked about for quite some time, actually, is now going to be incorporated into the refresh of the public art strategy, because it makes sense for that piece of work to be included in there.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. In terms of the annual festival that's planned, do we have an estimate of how much we would intend to spend as a council on that and preparation for it?
Not quite yet.
Well, we in terms of the first year in 23, so a report went to Cabinet on the 23rd of September that allocated a figure of 1.5 million towards an annual festival next year?
And I know you mentioned issues around Birmingham Museums Trust in terms, not issues specifically, but issues around costs and those kind of things. Do you envisage that there is a considerable risk to Birmingham Museums Trust as it stands, or do you believe that in the long term, organisations like Birmingham Museums Trust will be able to survive any financial struggles?
It's a question.
Well, it is a very good question, Chair, because it's a very difficult time, as Councillor Francis was alluding to, with an organisation that has a building as substantial as the museums do. Well, more than one building. I think there's 8 in total, isn't there, across the portfolio. The cost of living of energy costs is actually a substantial issue for organisations to deal with, as combined with, as Councillor Francis was saying, with the cost of living and increasing pressure on spend for both, the public and also schools and other organisations. So that's one pressure that was sort of not foreseen in the space. The margins are quite tight, without a doubt. We've unfortunately had to reduce our funding over the years because of the austerity agenda, etc. And although it is a contract, and museums have done a remarkable job in securing income where they can, we need to keep a very close eye. We've got a contract with the museums. They're sort of a 4-year. It's like that's 25-year contract, but is rotated every 4 years with the funding agreement that's in place. So museums are very keen that obviously they hopefully can secure inflation on their contract fee next year, because that's an important aspect of the fees income for them. We're also waiting, as Councillor Francis mentioned, on Friday for the Arts Council's announcement of the NPO National Portfolio Organisation status and substantial funding that comes in from the Arts Council for the NPO. Now, I don't know whether the museums, they asked for an uplift, whether they will get one, but if they do, that would help alleviate their financial situation. But it is something, Chair, that we're going to have to keep a very careful eye on.
Perhaps we could have, in a few months' time, kind of a report on where we're at in terms of museums specifically and financial help to be, and kind of estimates of where we might go to next up this kind of conversation.
Yes, and interestingly, just for members' benefits, we have quarterly contract monitoring meetings with the museums, as well as monthly officer group meetings. So the dialogue between ourselves and the museums, I obviously attend the board meetings as well as an observer, as contract manager, if you like. The museums also report to the Company Governance Committee, chaired by Councillor Mosquito. So one of the co-directors has been asked to, so they provide a report anyway, but then will attend when asked to. So museums is going to company governance next, I think this side of Christmas. So information that they receive will also be pertinent to this committee.
Can I come in on that, Chair?
Yeah.
I think that's best case is to say need to keep a close eye on it. But I think with regards to bringing it to this committee is broadening it, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be other organisations that the council gives money to, as well as the arts council gives funding to, that are pretty worried about their future. And I think broadening that for Birmingham, I mean, we talk about in these slides, and I really am, putting Birmingham on the map. Is that sort of sense? That's what these slides are about. All these reviews about hosting the big events and what have you, and attracting people to Birmingham. And I think some of our biggest tourist attractions are worried, and they are quite worried. And I think that in terms of if you want to bring it back to this committee, let's broaden it across so many of our organisations. Might be a good point.
Just to pick up on that, I mean, it's a really important point, and I lost count the number of times over the summer months of the Commonwealth Games, with this massive influx of visitors that we have from all over the world, and locals who really, have missed, how much Birmingham has to offer. So it's absolutely in all our interests to keep those important institutions and organisations going. They're part of our sort of cultural ecology, if you like. They're why people in this town sometimes on Saturday you can go to museums, spend money in galleries or the shop. And that has a knock-on effect of a wider economy, and that's really, really important to us. Everybody, no doubt, everybody's working really, really hard internally and externally, to make sure that we have all the resources in place to secure their futures. But, you know, as Simon said, it's a very, very difficult time. You know, we're just doing all we can to try and ensure survival. You know, and you know, with that said, some organisations are looking at how they might do things differently, like they did during COVID, for example. And there are some, you know, fairly imaginative ideas underway to look at how we increase footfall, or if people aren't physically coming to, you know, an art gallery or museum, how do we get the stuff to them? There are discussions underway with, you know, different types of sponsorship and support from business community. So it's about all of us recognising the importance of that and banking the drug continually of what our city's got to offer.
On libraries being used as warm spaces, there have been some comments made publicly, not from the council, but just questions that have been asked of the council or councillors around some of these libraries not being the most appropriate for warm spaces because of the kind of building that they are. So do we have have we assessed how many of our libraries are actually able to be used as warm spaces? I was just wondering what that number is.
Yeah, there is a short list now. There's a short list of 12 to 14 libraries, as well as the Library of Birmingham, where there'll be 3 areas within the Library of Birmingham. One of them being a special down with DWP in the youth hub, will be a hub aimed at families and young people, and then there'll be 2 additional areas on other floors. But yes, and that shortlist was derived both by a mapping exercise across the city, so dependent on what other facilities there are, or whether there's other places like community centres, leisure centres that are best placed within those areas to be the warm hubs. And then another criteria that has been applied has been the suitability of those library venues to be warm spaces.
Yeah.
But of course, everybody all over the winter is welcome to come into libraries and use them, but specified as those hubs, all that criteria has been taken into account.
And so before you come in, Jane, because you might have an answer on this as well, is there a consideration for extending the opening hours of some of these libraries that are being used as warm spaces?
There isn't at the moment, that isn't, but it is definitely something that we could consider working with partners if there is the demand there, and we see that so it's part of it. It's not in that initial plan. It will be a build that we will open, we'll see what demand is, see what's required, and then we will build on that as winter goes along and opportunities present themselves.
Yeah, I just think on that one, this very much feels like an area of work in progress. Because we're having to respond as a city, like other places are, very, very quickly to a particular set of circumstances. So I think week on week,
yes,
month on month,
definitely. And we're seeing from the council comms that every day the number of warm spaces announced is increasing. So that's, I think that's definitely acknowledged that it is a work in progress.
Of course, to ensure that you're updated in terms of usage and what's and where. That will be a given for the wider council.
Cool. Thank you. That's all my questions. Anyone else got any more questions? Because this has been quite a useful session, I think. But I know that Jane is going to go.
I do like to go soon.
But I'm mindful that it's been really productive, so we'll
I'll just put you on this one. We're talking about warm spaces. Are leisure centres included in that? And also, is there facilities for people to do physical activity in all wards in Birmingham? For example, in my ward, in Ward End, there's no swimming bar.
Leisure centres are included. Beyond that, I'm afraid I can't.
I couldn't name the leisure centres, but actually there were a significant number of leisure centres on the original list that came out. So that's reassuring, both our own in-house ones and our externally delivered ones. There certainly isn't a swimming pool in every ward of the city. I think we know that. In terms of leisure provision, again, there wouldn't be a leisure facility in every single ward of the city. There was a strategic review done in about 2014 that looked at a series of both rationalisation and reinvesting in our leisure stock, which is why we've got a total of 9 either new or refurbished leisure centres within the city because of that process that was gone through. So no, there isn't a leisure facility in every ward city.
There is a list, I think, the leisure centre, I've seen, because that's statutory, something else is on there. So
Yeah.
there is a list publicly available of leisure centres that are included.
And I think it's also just important to note that as councillors, we can all contribute to possible venues and locations that might be able to be used as walk spaces ourselves as well. So if you have got suggestions, I know that you can talk to officers about what, if you've got an idea for what a venue that could be used.
I approached a church and they've agreed to do it in
Yeah.
a thing called one day. So churches.
And then they can register officially on their website, I think, as a walk space.
So if I may, I think we'll find examples of that going on across the city, the organisations responding on a fairly ad hoc basis and not necessarily sharing with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I think
But-
it's their national warm space. I
Yeah.
think they're called warm space on
Yeah.
their programme. And I think
Right.
some will have made themselves warm spaces independently, I think.
Yeah. If no one else got any more questions, then I'm sure we can allow Shane to
Thank you, Chair.
but I know that we've all got some specific, preferences and desires. So if anyone's got any questions for them, I'm sure we'll be able to email them.
I'd just quite like that contact on the conversation.
Well, Amanda's noted that, so we can get that
Thank you.
relationship for you. And actually, it might be something worthwhile bringing to the committee at some point anyway, specifically. So,
Because there are a lot of conversations, 32.
and there's a point in the agenda where we can discuss what we use our future meetings for as well. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. That's nice.
I'll let you all go before we continue.
If you don't.
Thank you very much all for questions you've asked of them, and I think it was a very useful 45 minutes to an hour or so. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is Student Commonwealth Games Legacy, and then just to show the future approach of how we discuss overview and scrutiny of the legacy for our work programme. So it's just about kind of perhaps how you want to go forward, because I think it's really important to remember that the legacy is an ongoing thing. And as we are very early stage of that legacy still, there isn't going to be the data or the statistics necessarily to review some of the things that have already happened and the impacts on Commonwealth Games. But it's just about what your ideas might be in terms of how we scrutinise and look at the overview of that legacy going forward. If anyone has any comments.
Well, seeing what's been set up, that's new, that's come out of the games, seeing this is a new after school club, this is a new programme that's going on at a leisure centre, something like that, that's all community centre that's been happening as a result of the Commonwealth Games. But I think also with legacy, the main thing is we want to make sure it doesn't fizzle out, because a lot of these things have a lot of energy for a few weeks, a few months. We don't want them to fizzle out. So I think that sort of thing, Chair, keeping the feet to the fire and making sure they're always updating the legacy plan as well, because things change, national laws or whatever changes things on a local level. So and locally things change as well. So it's also making sure that the plan is actually being updated.
I think the annual festival that's been announced will require a lot of scrutiny from us to make sure that that is in the mind frame of the Commonwealth Games and not just something that is just an annual festival for whatever reason. And hopefully that annual festival can attract other things that we can influence in terms of the legacy of the Commonwealth Games. I think also we can recognise that through the inquiry that we're doing as a committee, hopefully if that results in some positives and recommendations to Cabinet and the Council, that is in itself an example of legacy of Commonwealth Games.
I mean, I might, correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect there is a report that will go towards the next Commonwealth Games, because that they'll reflect the next Commonwealth Games. I can't remember what it is now, but will reflect on the legacy for Birmingham, because Birmingham reflects on the legacies of the Gold Coast.
There's a legacy team, isn't there? That to do with the that was from the organising committee.
I think all the principal point was that we should be feeding into that report as a sort of, I don't know what the mechanism is for that. There must be some form of legacy report which is produced.
Yes, I think the key bit in terms of, and that will be a kind of continuous thing, because obviously there's things they can identify now, but as they move forward, they will be able to. So for example, we've just seen information about visitor numbers. So you've got like really early indicators of data, but as Councillor Sandy referenced, it's how that is sustained. So in some cases, some of the data, some of the kind of the quantitative stuff to support the things they think would be in a report is going to take some time for it to come through. So I suppose the question to sort of supplement the chair's question is, it's what you as a committee would like to look at around the legacy, and that would be a really broad book, but it's also when you do that, because if you do that now, in a lot, you may not have that detail. You might, we said, I think this might still be in some way how it looks and feels, rather than actually having some of that hard data to support those looks and feels.
Because the legacy can be a standing item in this agenda for our meetings, or we can decide as a committee that actually we're going to look at the legacy at a specific date or a specific meeting and make that a focus. And there are people that we can invite to those meetings to give us an update on how they're proceeding with supporting that legacy, like we had the council and others other officers who were involved in the Commonwealth Games come to the last meeting, and he's also been previously.
So I think if you're, as you're saying, Amelia, if the data's coming through, continuing coming through, you know, we might have immediate visitor numbers, that's the sustainability of it. It would suggest we have somebody come back, I don't know, whether it's every 6 months or annually.
And if that's an area you want to look at, because obviously there's going to be lots of the legacy is a kind of quite a broad piece, isn't it? There's lots of different things. So if you did want to look at it in terms of visitors, but there might be lots of other areas you want to look at. So it's about understanding as a committee and considering what those areas could be, and then we could explore when the best time to look at them for you could be. But it perhaps needs more time to.
I'll just bring Ron in because you jammed up.
Yeah, no, about the legacy. In last month's meeting, you talked about the parks.
Yeah.
Which you did email me about that, and I put it in my dress for some reason. So I apologise for that. I did reply, but it was in the dress.
Okay.
You definitely need to have that.
Okay. So
Get more people into the parks.
So we can have that in the work programme of the committee as a whole, and there might be legacy links there as well in terms of our green spaces and physical activities.
Use of green spaces.
But I think Ron's specific issue was about car park charges, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, part of the discussion for me was we need to get more people back in the parks.
Accessibility.
You can't do that. We're going to start charging people to use it.
So that was Ron's, and I've suggested that we have a chance to scrutinise that in terms of, are we seeing a drop in visitors to those parks that are charging since those charges have been introduced? So we can include that as part of the work programme actually, so we can get an officer or a cabinet member to specifically come to us as a committee for us to, and I think we need to make it broader than just car park charges, but make that car park charges is a central part of what you want to talk about and others. But just to make sure that we use their time as well, we can talk about parks more generally in the kind of sphere of physical activity as well.
You need to start using them more, start doing more activities in parks.
But if we can go back to that another time, we can discuss who we invite specifically, but we can do that at one of the meetings in the work programme, and we can let you know when that's going to be. Is that okay? On the legacy then, just go back to that for a second. So I'm meeting with, we're going to have a meeting with someone from Sport Birmingham very soon, who we can invite, who I'd like to invite to our committee as well. But then also looking at adult social care as well, in terms of, because the inquiry also looks at disability access to physical activity and sports off the back of Commonwealth Games. And we've had some involvement from our officers who in the Directorate of Adult and Social Care as well. And we have got Councillor Marianne Carr coming to the next meeting to give us a similar update to what Jane gives, but in terms of her remit.
What about sort of arts and cultural strands?
So, yeah, I mean, I think we started a little bit on the annual festival thing there, and as you know, the opening, not the opening ceremony, the opening ceremony as well, but as you know, there was kind of a week and a few days leading up to the opening ceremony where there was lots of kind of festival-like activities around the city. So that's. And if that's where they want to go with the annual festival, there's an opportunity there for us to scrutinise.
There'd be definitely a piece of work around that engagement, I think, for that cultural arts strand, and how successful that was, that engagement, both in the city centre, but also outside the city centre. And how best to keep that engagement going with an ongoing festival.
I know I'd be interested in it from the perspective of how it's felt outside of the city centre as well. Has anyone got any more comments on the legacy specifically?
I think focusing on the culture side of things might be a key thing to this, because I do think it will come to the forefront with a lot of, what was said there about the museum, Birmingham Museum Trust is quite big. That's quite important. That's they're struggling. And a lot of organisations like them are struggling too. We're not talking about businesses, and businesses are struggling themselves. But in the remit of this,
a lot of them are not for profit.
In the remit of this committee, the culture aspect of it, the non-for-profit, fantastic attractions we've got are struggling. And I think when it comes to legacy as well, we might need to look at how do we maintain, for example, or rather, how do we retain those people that came and visited these areas while they're here for the games?
Because part of the legacy is the visitor numbers, which we talked about. So actually, what would be useful information for us in perhaps 6 months' time? We had the visitor numbers for Library of Birmingham during the Commonwealth Games. Actually, if we could have visitor numbers again in 6 months' time, or however long time, or even now, and comparing them to during the Commonwealth Games and then the 2018, 2019 numbers that we had, and see if there is still an increase from the Commonwealth Games of people attending, because there'll be people that live in Birmingham that actually never went to the Library of Birmingham in their life. And actually, there'll be people that do go to other things as well. But actually, if the Commonwealth Games existed in Birmingham, led them to go to the Library of Birmingham or other things, that will be hopefully visible from those visitor numbers.
It's not pertinent really to the game's legacy, but it's something that is quite important, which is schools. How many schools are taking their children in those classes and on trips to the museum, trips to the music or whatever it is, the shows, the theatres, Hippodrome.
We can include that in the kind of work programme in terms of looking at how educational organisations and schools and whatnot are using our cultural and heritage opportunities and how accessible that is for them.
Because it's great that they go somewhere else, but it's also, we've got some good stuff on our own doorstep as well.
But engagement will become increasingly critical. We've heard that, everybody's waiting for sorts of announcements from the government, and whether it's the Hippodrome or Birmingham Ballet or CDSO, we're all expecting, sort of 15 to 20% cuts in the Arts Council funding. And so they will have to increase their engagement on less money. So engagement's a big piece. Really.
And I suppose we'll have the opportunity to see the effect of cost of living on businesses in terms of their main ticket prices for certain things. And actually we may then see numbers decreasing in attendance. So I think that data will become apparent as well, and we can specifically look for that data as a committee for us to discuss and scrutinise as well. Are we happy then that we've got a few things in terms of the legacy for us to fit into the work programme of how we discuss the Commonwealth Games legacy? And I know we've kind of discussed the work programme more generally. If anyone else has got any comments on the work programme more generally in terms of what they'd like to see in future meetings of what we discuss. So we've got issues around school engagement and accessibility, and there was something else I've noted down here as well. But yeah, is there anything else that we'd like to see in this committee, specifically in our work programme? It's fine if you don't, because we can make sure that there is. But I just want to give the opportunity to you guys as well. So we've got the thing about physical activity and parks and park numbers that we can include in our work programme as well.
It was nice. The last couple of years, all these things coming up, James. So it was nice to have something different.
Well, that's why I'm really keen to say. We've got to remember the other remit of our committee is not just the Commonwealth Games, even though the legacy of that is really important and can bring great things for our residents. I want to make sure, and you guys do as well, that we're looking at the other remits of this committee as well, because actually I don't want us to miss an opportunity to have overview or scrutiny of those things.
I mean, I support the green spaces point because it was partly connected to the conservation area point. That is part of our heritage in our city. And, are they best being protected and increasing use in parks? It's a part of a bigger piece of.
So if we make, because I think it's really good, so we've got some ideas for legacy, so if we make a concerted effort to fit into our work programme and the legacy stuff we want to discuss, and then fit into some of the ideas around the work programme that we've already discussed, and then we can see where our gaps are for the remaining meetings of the year. Is that okay?
Back to the parks as well, it was about culture. Right? Cultural events in parks. Let's make use of them.
Yeah.
It's an ideal place.
There's a few big ones, but actually there's no reason why other things couldn't happen. And as a council, that there's a statistic about we have more parks than something, I don't know, similar to the canal thing. But there's, our parks are brilliant green spaces, and actually we might find that they're better looked after and better cared for if organisations are using them. And there might be barriers to why they're not being used. Maybe organisations don't even know that they can use parks and green spaces for events and stuff like that.
Is there a volunteer piece? Because obviously part of the Commonwealth Games and the legacy would have been volunteers. Is there a piece there about volunteers continuing to work, whether it's parks or cultural spaces or?
There was something at the last meeting that discussed. So we discussed the amount of volunteers that we had, how many were from Birmingham, and then we also noted how many wards did not give volunteers, because the goal was to have volunteers from every ward in Birmingham. I've got a list of those wards which I can share around with.
Could you share?
I did get it recently, but I read it and then forgot to do something with it. But I will share that round with the committee. There's about 7 wards in total that did not offer volunteers. I say offer, there wasn't a meeting and they decided there's wards, no one in this area can give volunteers, but there's a list that I can share around with everyone. And then I think there is something around that was mentioned that they do have some data on the amount of volunteers that have volunteered in other ways since the games, but I'll have to double check if that is true, if it's valuable, and in case I've misunderstood it. But I can do that.
But volunteering is an ongoing.
Yes, so I think there is some numbers there about those volunteers specifically. But actually, you know, I know we talked about, you know, using cultural spaces for warm spaces today. And I know personally that a lot of cultural spaces in my ward the warm spaces are being run by volunteers.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there is something there as well that we can include in the work programme. Is everyone content? Or would like to raise anything else? We're going to finish early, I think, by the looks of it. But if everyone is content, if you think of anything in the meanwhile, please drop me an email, and I will share around the wards that didn't have volunteers forward, and then we can discuss fitting some of these things into the work programme. We can share that with you, and we can look at any gaps as well, and come with any ideas. The date and time of the next meeting, we discussed it last time. It will be at 1:30. I know, Deborah, you said you have a standing meeting at this time. The reason for that is because we've got Mariam Khan coming. She has care and responsibilities, so her dad, she works quite flexibly. So we've done that to accommodate her. It would usually still be 2 o'clock, but we have done that to accommodate her. But
I'll try my best to come. It's just the two meetings over.
No worries. And then that'll be in committee room 3 and 4, which is the room that we've usually been in. Please do give me apologies when you are aware of them. And then we've had no requests for call-ins or councillor call for actions or petitions. And no one has informed me that they'd like to raise any urgent business. So it's just for the committee to agree that you give the authority to myself as chair and officers that in an urgent situation between meetings, the chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has the authority to act on behalf of the committee. Thanks for agreeing. Yeah, we can stop broadcasting. Just pause for a minute.